On the night Brandon Ivy vanished, nothing felt out of the ordinary, at least, that's what everyone thought. But you begin by telling the viewer that disappearances usually leave behind some trace, some clue, some logical path. Brandon's case left behind nothing except a single, corrupted second of security footage and a chilling whisper no one can explain. You open with the hook that Brandon was seen walking across a brightly lit parking lot, his keys in hand, his posture relaxed, moments away from getting into his car. Then the camera flickers for less than a heartbeat, a fraction of time you can barely catch unless you slow it down frame by frame, and suddenly Brandon is gone. Not running, not being taken, just gone, as if pulled out of the world. The police blame the glitch, but you tell the audience the glitch wasn't the scary part. The scary part was the audio distortion captured at the exact same second, a faint clicking sound followed by Brandon's voice whispering, "It found me." You transition into the intro, explaining that Brandon Ivy wasn't the kind of person who would disappear. He was grounded, reliable, and always in touch with friends and family. The night he vanished, he had clocked out of his shift, texted his sister, headed home, and walked toward his car with the routine of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Yet investigators found his car untouched, his phone still pinging from inside his apartment, and his coat discovered miles away in a forest clearing folded with eerie precision, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. Locals reported strange lights drifting between the trees and a low metallic hum that lingered for hours, vibrating through the ground. You tell the viewer that what makes this case terrifying isn't just the disappearance itself, but the fact that Brandon reappeared 48 hours later, with no explanation and no memory of leaving the parking lot, only fragments of something he insists wasn't human watching him from the moment the cameras flickered. Investigators began piecing together Brandon's 48 hours, but every clue they found only twisted the timeline further. You describe how search teams followed a trail of footprints leading from the edge of the highway into the forest, spaced far apart as if Brandon had been running in complete panic. The strange part was that the footprints weren't consistent, some were deep, some barely visible, and then 6 minutes into the forest they stopped in the middle of an untouched patch of soil, ending abruptly with no drag marks, no signs of a fall, and no continuation on either side, as if Brandon had simply lifted off the ground. Drone footage taken later showed faint circular patterns in the dirt surrounding the last footprint, patterns that looked almost like scorched rings. The search widened, and that's when locals reported seeing flashes of pale white light pulsing between the trees, drifting too smoothly to be flashlights, too silently to be vehicles, and too fast to belong to any person. One couple swore that as they drove past the woods, their car radio turned to static and a distorted voice whispered their names in Brandon's tone, even though they had never met him. As the hours passed, Brandon's family received a voicemail no one could explain. At 3:12 a.m., Brandon's sister heard his voice whispering, broken and trembling, "Don't let it see you." The background was filled with a metallic grinding noise and a rhythmic clicking, like something stepping on bone. When police traced the call, they found it had originated from Brandon's phone still lying on his kitchen table. You explain how experts analyzed the audio and found something terrifying, overlapping frequencies that didn't match human speech, almost like another voice repeating Brandon's words half a second behind him. Meanwhile, forest rangers searching a deeper section of the woods discovered several trees marked with jagged symbols, carved high above normal reach. The bark wasn't cut, it was peeled in long, smooth strips as though something had melted it off. One ranger later admitted hearing what sounded like a man gasping for breath behind him, but every time he turned, the forest stood perfectly still. His radio captured bursts of static that, when replayed, formed a whisper, "Don't follow." Then you bring the audience to the exact moment Brandon was found. At dawn on the second day, a hiker spotted a thin figure stumbling out of a dried riverbed, moving unnaturally stiff, like he was being held upright by invisible strings. It was Brandon, barefoot, shaking, and covered in dirt that didn't match the soil in the area. His fingernails were chipped as if he had been clawing at something hard, yet there were no abrasions on the ground or rocks around him. When paramedics approached, Brandon flinched and muttered, "Lights, too close." It watches from the corner, his eyes kept darting to empty spaces, focusing on nothing. At the hospital, doctors noted his pupils didn't respond properly to light, expanding when they should have constricted. His internal temperature was dangerously low, like he had been exposed to freezing conditions, even though the nights had been warm. The strangest discovery was a circular burn mark on the back of his neck, a perfect ring, thin and smooth, with no signs of infection or trauma. It almost resembled a brand. You explain how, once stabilized, Brandon tried piecing together fragments of his memory. He described hearing a hum, not from outside but inside his head, vibrating his bones. He remembered flashes of white light, a presence that bent the air, and a sensation like falling upward, weightless yet suffocating. He said he felt watched not by eyes, but by something that understood his thoughts before he had them. Every time he tried explaining more, he grew terrified, clutching his neck and begging them to turn off the lights because it hides in bright places. When police took him back to the area, his entire body tensed, and he refused to step out of the car, pointing toward the tree line and whispering, "It's waiting for me." The officers said there was nothing there, but the dashboard camera recorded a faint flicker of motion, something tall and thin, standing perfectly still between two trees, vanishing a split second later. In the following days, investigators attempted to map Brandon's route, but their equipment malfunctioned every time they neared the riverbed. Compasses spun uncontrollably, GPS units froze, and radios emitted a low humming identical to the one Brandon described. One ranger claimed he saw a figure standing behind a tree with its head tilted unnaturally far to the side, but when he blinked it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a clicking noise that made his chest vibrate. You end the main body by explaining that Brandon's ordeal didn't stop after he was found. He refused to sleep, insisted the lights stay on, and begged staff not to let anyone stand behind him. On the third night, hospital cameras caught him waking up suddenly, staring into a dark corner of the room, and whispering, "You said you'd let me go." 5 seconds later, the monitor flickered, the video cut to static, and when the picture returned, Brandon was curled up on the floor, shaking violently, while the corner he had stared at remained perfectly empty. In the final days before he vanished again, Brandon became increasingly paranoid, insisting that whoever had taken him during those missing 48 hours had only returned him as bait. He told nurses that the humming sound was getting louder each night, that he could feel something brushing against the back of his neck even when no one was near him, and that the lights in his room flickered whenever it got close. His final recorded conversation was with a hospital therapist, where he whispered that the thing wasn't bound to the woods at all. It followed patterns, signals, and people who looked directly at it. "It doesn't move when you're watching," he said, "but it learns you." 2 weeks after his return, Brandon disappeared from his home without triggering a single camera or opening a door. The only thing he left behind was his journal lying open on the bed. On the last page, written in shaky, uneven letters, were the words, "If you see the lights, don't blink." It chooses the blink. Brandon Ivy's case remains unsolved, sealed under an unexplained security classification, and the forest where he was first found is now blocked off with warnings that mention unstable ground even though no geological issues exist there. You end with a lingering question that leaves viewers uneasy long after the video ends. What if Brandon didn't escape at all? What if it simply let him go because it wasn't finished choosing? And if that's true, how many others has it already marked without them ever realizing?